Alright, so here we are today with a little look into magic meta and why mages should be the most overpowered class in the game, but they aren't. So, before we get into how they're used, let's just get into what are they. So, essentially, the mage class is an unarmored ranged class that uses magic to fight and assist their teammates. Mages, this is a little picture of me that I was doing for a thumbnail that I never actually got used, but still sort of in progress, of me in the mage outfit I actually wore for a week of ASC. It's like 3 different pieces of black gardening fabric and strapped around me in a way that looks like robes. I think I have like one over my shoulders, one over my arms, and then one like tied around my waist or something like that. But essentially they come together to form a wizard robe to be part of the outfit. Then I also have a big staff that is not a tagging weapon. And I also have a mana ball, which is a tennis ball covered in more fabric that you can throw at opponents or teammates to either damage or buff them. So the whole combat element of the mage class is all done with their tennis ball and just throwing it at people or at the ground or at things. It's essentially just throwing a tennis ball. So if you can literally throw a tennis ball well, you'll just be a god tier mage. You'll be unbelievably good if you're really good at underhand throwing tennis balls and getting people where they can't deflect your tennis ball, because the only counter to a mage if you come upon one in a trail is trying to bat away their tennis ball with your sword, but that's really hard to do, especially if they're really good. So they're throwing their tennis ball at people. What can the tennis ball do? So essentially, in most weeks, there are 4 main spells, or different variations on the names for these 4 main spells. Sometimes there are other themes, and so instead of like a nature theme, it'll be like a death theme or like a ice theme or something like that. But really, there are 4 really basic abilities. There's Fireball, which is a basic damage spell. So you throw it, if it hits them, they die. There's a Root spell, which is basic debuff, where you throw it, it hits them, they're stuck in place for the amount of time that it takes you to count. I think it's a 10-second count. So they're stuck in place for 10 seconds, essentially. There's Gust, which is basic enemy movement. So you throw it at them, if it hits, they and their whole group of people have to walk back a certain distance. Again, that changes by house rules. Sometimes it's really far, like 50 feet. Sometimes it's only like 15 or 20 feet. But still, you hit them and their whole force has to turn around, back up a certain distance. And then finally, Cleanse, which is kind of lame because its ability is it heals fire damage. So if somebody gets killed by a fireball and you're within 5 or 10 seconds away from them, you can cast Cleanse on them and it heals their fire damage. And so they're still alive and able to continue fighting. So it's a counter to other mages, but there aren't really all that many mages. So there's not a whole lot of chance to use Cleanse just because there aren't that really... There's not that many times you're going to get hit by a fireball and then your team also has a mage. It just doesn't happen. There's not very many. So sometimes there are also light and dark like mana, but that's really just a house rules thing. It's not super common. They sometimes have different abilities. Sometimes the mages can revive like dead people, not even dead because of fire damage, just like dead because anything, and it's on a very long cooldown, how long it takes for them to be able to do that. Or they can only do it like once per battle or something. It's a very potent ability, and so sometimes it's not even included. Sometimes they're only allowed to use these 4, and pretty much everyone only just uses the Fireball class, which is kind of a shame, but that's how it's pretty much is. So here's a lesson about why people don't get to do mages very often. And essentially how they get implemented into a classic week at ASE and why they don't really happen a whole lot. So essentially the way a week goes is the counselors try to like help the kids with making a certain thing one week or each day for that week. So at the end, they'll end out with a full kit and they can participate in games fully as much as they want to for like the latter 3 days. So On Monday, they really push kids if they haven't come with swords into making swords. On Tuesday, they push them into making shields or armor if they didn't already have that. Or if they came with swords but not shields or armor, they want to help them make shields and armor. And so ideally, like the first 2 days are kind of build days, but then after that, you have pretty much all the stuff you need. And so moving into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, some people will continue to build armor if they haven't finished anything on Tuesday, and they might like test out different classes. Like sometimes people switch from Scout, which is very easy because you just make 2 one-handed swords, to like Vanguard, where you make 2 two-handed swords, or they'll make a shield and switch to Knight class. But really, the first 2 days are where you build a first full kit, and then sometimes you might change a little bit your kit on Wednesday just because you've fought in Killmeister and died a bunch of times, and you're like, maybe a Vanguard would be cool. But that's all the basic styles. The thing is that Thursday and Friday are where range weapons come out. Bows, if everything else went well, and mana, if bows went well. So if all of these, if everyone in the realm, if there's like a good amount of armor and like people know what they're doing, people know how to make stuff, and they think that the kids are ready for that level of complexity, they'll add bows in on Wednesday or Thursday, or sometimes just on Friday, depending on how the week is going. If the week's going really well, they could get added in much earlier, and sometimes even from Monday, they'll be able to use in the castle, but not in major games. But bows sort of like a Thursday, Friday type thing, and then mana is after bows. So if bows go well, then sometimes on the very last day for the last games, they'll add in mana, which sucks because that's so last minute. So often mana doesn't really get implemented very well or very much. And so kids don't get a whole lot of time to familiarize themselves with it. And it's just a little bit of an unfortunate situation because most kids don't know any of the rules, and the rules are somewhat complex for each one of the different spells and how they affect and what they do. And like, yeah, so it really only gets rolled out on Fridays, Thursdays and Fridays, and on good weeks, maybe a little bit more, but like still not a whole lot, which is such a shame because that just means it doesn't get a lot of time to be tested and like for people to figure out what it's good with. So, and because of that, I feel really bad for most mages currently. So here you see a rather typical encounter where the blue team is losing with overwhelming numbers advantage. They have 4 people here, and their mage is way out over here and is being targeted, selectively targeted by 3 other people. Like, this team is doing a terrible job of protecting its mage, because ideally, its mage would be able to cast long-range spells over or around its own force to help them and not ever have to fight independently. If a mage is just fighting independently, they're just sort of going to get rushed and killed. Like, they're pretty screwed. They should be part of a force, not all of the force. And so trying to prevent your mage from being selectively targeted like this should be one of your biggest objectives. But most people aren't really used to having to protect one of your fighters more than others, because normally everyone's just all the same class. And so they just get targeted super hard and get killed really easy. And it's a shame because they just don't get to use their abilities to their fullest extent most weeks. Yeah, but that's pretty much how it normally goes, which is pretty awful because how they should function is they are a near perfect counter to tanks if they're well supported by other fighters. They're really good at making advances in battle lines. They have all of these different abilities. They can either gust to blow back the line. They can fireball to kill some armor titans, which are like serving as bulwarks. Okay, so basically the way it works, I'll get into this in another video, is you have 2 types of fighters, 2 types of like sword and shield fighters. You have essentially like pushers and taggers. The pushers don't really get as many kills, but just sort of like stand in the way and are able to control the flow of the battle. But because they're often slower, they're not really able to get all those kills that sometimes vanguards are able to. And then you have taggers or like vanguard people who are able to move really fast and have a lot of range and like do flanking maneuvers and then also get really high kill counts. In full armor, I'm very much a pusher. I'm very, very slow. But because it's very hard for people to kill me, I can sort of just walk forward and no one can do anything about it. But if they gust me back, then everyone has to go back. If I get fireballed and it goes through my armor, then I'm pretty screwed, and so is the rest of my line, because then they'll all get pushed back. And if they root me, if they throw a root spell and it hits me and I'm frozen in place for 10 seconds, they'll flank around me, and then when the spell goes off, they'll stab me in the back. And if there are other people there who are able to flank around after a mage is able to cast root, you can very, very effectively selectively target like a night class or something like that. It's a crazy, crazy good strategy. It just needs some teamwork and cooperation, and that doesn't always happen, but that's how it should happen, ideally. And that's just with the regular kit. These kind of mediocre infographics. So I think I made a video yesterday about ultra tactical mages. It was super cringy. I spoke very dramatically and had a lot of music over it. But essentially what I mean by this is that it is all of the teamwork and strategy that could go into the current mage kit, and then you expand their kit and make it even better. There are a lot of different things that I think mages could definitely like have the power to do. That'd be super cool. But they're so complex, it wouldn't really work very well in a regular week. And so it wouldn't really like be possible to do normally. I really like the idea of mages like having long chants for large spells and then being able to do really powerful things. So like a mage standing there and chanting out like 2 paragraphs of a mantra and then casting this massively powerful game altering spell that like changes how the game functions for a couple minutes or a couple seconds or something like that would be really awesome. Or sort of these two things combined. I think the mage should have more ability to support its own team, and like protect them from being damaged and allow them to damage more effectively just by being there. And so the opponent team should try really hard to target the mage, because the mage will constantly be able to apply buffs and apply extra abilities to its fighters. And so if you get them, all of the fighters get weaker also, more than just by losing a damage dealing person. Because mages that only fight like with mana balls and like fireballs just are very, very silly. They should be more than that. They should help their team. They should change how the game flows so that their team has a better chance of winning, not just like fight. So also, in some weeks they've had mages have the ability to revive dead team members, but only like once every 30 seconds or once every minute and a half. So it's not that overpowered, but in a line encounter where 1 life means the difference between being pushed back or pushing back, a single revive can be super potent really far down the trails. And yeah, it's very hard to police, because sometimes people will just end up like reviving over and over and over again when they shouldn't, or like too fast in between times. But being able to have that ability, if it was well policed, like in a game like Ultra Tactical, where it's 2 castles and just a bunch of people standing there, would be super duper cool. Just a like supplemental for like large division fighting type thing, where you're able to just sort of mutate and strengthen your force when you're alive and able to be there. Because if their team kills you, then they kill you and all the good things that you can do, like damage. But then their team also loses the ability to be revived. So really they lose more than just you, because the point of a mage class is you can't fight very well, but you can help out your team really well. And so the way that's currently used is they're currently just like fireball slinging like lone gun rangers, which is pretty awful, just because it like in a 2-on-1 they'll just be like stalked down and killed. But if they were like well protected, they could fight super duper well. And if they had more ability to help their teammate, they could be a game changing element, especially if they had like like more long chanting, long build up time, but like huge AoE spells. The reason why we don't do area of effect spells very often at AIC is just because they're complicated. They're hard to understand. If the chants, like, even if the chants are really long, some people like forget, and then so what you do is you throw a mana ball, it hits the ground, and then everything in a certain radius of it dies. But that radius is kind of hard to determine for a bunch of kids, and especially if they're in the middle of a battle and don't hear the chant being called, it's really, really difficult for area effect spells to be played out well. They often just get ignored or don't get counted, or people will act like they have a much smaller radius than they actually do, or a much larger radius than they actually do. But in a game like Ultra Tactical, where you could police that more closely, they could be super duper cool to expand their abilities. I think would be really awesome. And that's it for me today. As always, I'm Just Cardboard, their website, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for stopping by to watch another daily upload. I'm thinking of recording this at like 2 a.m. because I forgot to make a video for tomorrow. But hey, that's okay. So I'll be making some better videos this week. The boat stuff should all come out this week, so I'm really excited for everyone to see that. So yeah, that's it for me today. Best of luck, and I'll see you tomorrow for another daily upload.